There is a special density in the air during these past days, a heaviness that corresponds neither to the weather nor to external circumstances, but to an emotional atmosphere that has settled into your reality. It is very likely that you have felt a sudden restlessness, a kind of inner alarm that goes off for no apparent reason in the midst of daily routine. The logical mind, the one that always looks for tangible explanations and concrete evidence, tries to dismiss this feeling by saying that everything remains the same, that nothing has visibly changed, and that there is no reason to worry. But deep inside, in that place where the deepest intuition lives, one knows with certainty that something fundamental has moved in the invisible structure of this connection. It is not a product of imagination or fear. It is the innate ability to perceive the vibrations of someone who shares a deep bond with you. When two souls are intertwined by fate, physical silence does not cancel out energetic communication, and what is being perceived now is the echo of a decision made in the distance. This message reaches your life not by chance, but through resonance. The universe makes no calculation errors and sends no signals to someone who is not ready to decipher them. If these words resonate in you right now, it is because there is a precise alignment between your inner state and the truth that is about to reveal itself. There are cycles that must be closed so that others can open, and this restlessness that will not leave you in peace, this sudden awakening in the early hours of the morning, or this feeling of emptiness in your chest, are confirmations that the status quo has been broken. Someone at the other end of this invisible thread has reached a turning point. It is not a momentary whim or a superficial mood change. It is an inner collapse that has been developing slowly, drop by drop, until the glass finally overflowed. It is important to understand that what is happening is not a personal attack or a conscious act of lovelessness, although the loneliness it triggers may feel that way. What has happened is that this person has reached a limit of human and spiritual resilience. Often we are taught to value endurance, to stay, to fight, but rarely is it spoken of the cost of maintaining a situation that no longer resonates with the truth of one's being. This person has carried an invisible weight, an accumulation of unspoken words, unfulfilled expectations, and above all, a progressive disconnection from their own essence. The fatigue spoken of here is not the kind cured by a weekend of sleep or a holiday. It is a fatigue of the soul, an existential exhaustion that arises when one has tried to force a reality that no longer fits, or when one has given more energy than one had available. For a long time, everything may have seemed normal on the surface. The interactions continued, the routines remained, and the smiles, although perhaps a little dimmer, still appeared. But beneath this layer of normality, a silent struggle was being waged, a struggle between the desire to maintain the connection and the urgent need to survive emotionally. The decision to take distance, to be silent, or to withdraw was not made yesterday or today. It was a conclusion reached after many sleepless nights, after many inner debates between heart and mind. It was a quiet decision made in the solitude of one's own consciousness in order to protect the little that remained of energetic integrity. The intuition you feel is the alarm system that recognizes this withdrawal. Although there has been no final conversation or detailed explanation, the energy does not lie. One feels the absence even before the physical farewell becomes concrete, completely. One feels the change in the gaze, the coldness in the words, or the delay in responses. It is not indifference, it is self-preservation. This person has withdrawn inward because the outside world and the demands of this connection in its current form have become unsustainable. It is vital to validate what you feel. You are not imagining anything. This anxiety is confirmation that the connection is real, so real that your emotional system registers the movements of the other as if they were your own. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, allows these pauses to occur, not to punish, but to reorder. Sometimes love alone is not enough when the structure on which it rests is unbalanced. This person has not pulled away because love necessarily disappeared, but because the dynamic, as it was built, consumed their life reserves. It is like trying to run a marathon with an open wound. The moment comes when the body stops, not because it does not want to reach the finish line, but because it needs to heal in order to continue. The decision made is essentially a cry for help from the soul, asking for space to breathe, to find itself again, and to evaluate whether it is possible to go on without losing oneself in the process. The uncertainty is painful, and silence can be the most deafening sound there is. But there is a hidden truth in this scenario that must be revealed in order to find some peace. It is not about a definitive end carved in stone, but about an inevitable energetic consequence. Life demands transformation. Intuition has brought you here to confirm that yes, something has changed, something has broken, but not to leave you in despair, rather to offer you a higher perspective on the facts. This person could no longer continue, and their withdrawal is the symptom of something much deeper than simple disinterest. It is the result of exhausting performance, of maintaining a facade that could no longer breathe. But in order to understand why this distance was inevitable and necessary right now, one must look to a place where the light of consciousness usually does not reach. Into the depths of the psyche and the masks we wear in order to be loved. If you are ready to integrate this teaching into your life, write in the comments, "I trust in the transformation." To understand the magnitude of what is happening, we must turn to one of the most revealing concepts of depth psychology, an idea that Carl Jung explored extensively and that explains with surgical precision the behavior of this person. At every moment, all human beings, without exception, are constructing an interface to interact with the world, a kind of social mask designed to make a good impression, to be accepted, to meet the expectations of others, and to protect ourselves from rejection. This structure is called the persona, a term derived from the mask's actors in ancient times wore to amplify their voices and define their role in the play. This particular person your heart asks about has carried a very heavy mask for far too long, and the weight of this performance has finally caused a collapse. Imagine for a moment the titanic effort required to maintain an image of strength when one feels fragility inside. Imagine the wear and tear of appearing always available, always kind, or perhaps always indifferent and in control, when in reality there are unprocessed emotions inside. This person constructed a persona, a mask, to relate to you and to the world. Perhaps it was the mask of someone who can handle everything, or someone who needs no one, or someone who always pleases. At first, the mask worked. It was useful. It allowed the relationship to flow and made you feel a false sense of security. But masks are rigid. They do not grow. They do not breathe. And over time, they begin to suffocate the one who wears them. The exhaustion we are talking about, this "I can't take it anymore," is the direct result of the friction between who this person really is and who they pretended to be. It is not about a malicious lie or a calculated deception. Most of the time, the mask is adopted unconsciously as a defense mechanism learned in childhood or past relationships. One learns that one must behave in a certain way to receive love, that certain dark or vulnerable parts must be hidden, and one begins to play a role. But in a bond of deep connection like this, the truth always fights to come out. The energy required to keep the mask in place is immense, and the day comes when the reserves are depleted. What you have witnessed recently, this abrupt change, this coldness or this escape, is the exact moment the mask tore. The person no longer has the life force to maintain the facade. They can no longer pretend that everything is fine, or that they do not care, or that they can handle everything. The psychic system has said, enough. The decision to distance oneself is actually a desperate attempt to breathe again. By withdrawing from your presence, this person is not fleeing from you as a human being. They are fleeing from the mirror that you represent. With your love and your presence, you invite true intimacy. And true intimacy requires the removal of the mask. If this person feels that without their mask, they are not worthy of love, or if they are afraid to show their true vulnerability, the only option their frightened mind finds is escape. It is essential to understand that this process is an identity crisis. This person has merged so completely with their mask that they have forgotten who they are beneath it. When they sense that the facade is crumbling, they experience deep panic, a feeling of disintegration. That is why the decision seems so radical and sometimes so cruel. There is no room for gentle explanations. When one feels that the inner structure is collapsing, the priority becomes the survival of the ego. They retreat into silence in an attempt to put the mask back together, or, at best, to figure out who they are without it. This exhaustion also explains why there may have been promises that were not kept or intentions that never materialized. It was not a lack of desire, it was a lack of energetic capacity. The mask promised things that the true self was not ready to fulfill. The mask said, "I will always be there," but the inner self was exhausted and needed solitude. The mask said, "I will give you everything you need." But the inner self was empty and needed to fill itself first. When the persona collapses, all those promises are left hanging in the air, creating confusion and pain for the one who waits. But this collapse now is better than the continuation of a farce that would have been far more damaging in the long run. A relationship based on the interaction of two masks can never achieve spiritual fullness. The masks must fall so that the souls can touch, and therefore the decision to leave or to create distance is a defense mechanism against the unbearable pressure of being someone one is not. It is an act of brutal honesty, even if it is painful. With their absence, this person is saying that they can no longer play the script that was written. They need to step off the stage, turn off the lights, and remain in the dark to see whether there is still something real within them. It is a moment of extreme vulnerability disguised as coldness. We often interpret silence as arrogance or disinterest, when in reality, from a Jungian perspective, it can be the refuge of a psyche that feels exposed and fragile. The pain you feel is real, and the feeling of rejection is piercing. But if you can look beyond the surface behavior, you will see a human being who is afraid of their own inadequacy, someone who prefers to leave rather than disappoint, or someone who desperately needs to find themselves before they can offer something authentic to another. The mask has fallen to the ground and shattered. Trying to glue it back together will be of no use. What has died is the false form in which you related to each other, not necessarily the possibility of love. But this inner collapse does not happen in a vacuum, nor is it an isolated event. There is a hidden reason, a root cause, why this withdrawal affects you so deeply and why this person fled specifically from your energy. And it has to do with an invisible contract that you unknowingly signed, and with the fear of a light that was paradoxically too bright to be held. When the social mask falls, an even more complex and fascinating dynamic is revealed at the center of this connection. To understand why this person fled specifically from this connection, and not from others that were more superficial, we must explore what is known in depth psychology as projection. We often believe that we fall in love with someone because of their external qualities, but the truth is far more mysterious. At the deepest levels of the psyche, we feel magnetically drawn to those people who carry fragments of our own soul that we have forgotten or suppressed. This person saw something in you that belongs to them, but that they do not dare to claim as their own. They saw in your essence a freedom, a capacity to love, or a radiance that their own shadow had kept hidden. You became a living mirror of their unlived potential. And while this creates an irresistible attraction, it also awakens an uncontrollable fear. Here, a fundamental concept for your peace of mind comes into play: sacred fear. Normally, when someone distances themselves, the human mind tends to interpret it as disinterest or a lack of affection. The inner narrative is usually destructive and suggests that if this person left, they did not find enough value in what was offered. The energetic reality, however, is diametrically opposed. There is a kind of fear that does not arise from danger or negativity, but from the sublime. It is the vertigo one feels at the edge of a beautiful but immense cliff. This person did not distance themselves due to a lack of love, but due to an excess of reality. The connection that formed between the two of you generated such a high emotional tension that their nervous system, perhaps accustomed to lukewarm or transactional relationships, could not process it. Imagine someone who has lived in a dim room for a long time. When they are suddenly exposed to bright sunlight, their instinctive reaction is not immediate gratitude, but pain in the eyes and an urgent need to return to the darkness to protect themselves. You were that sun. Your presence, your devotion, and the truth you radiate acted like a revealing light that illuminated not only the beauty but also the cracks, insecurities, and unhealed wounds of this person. Being with you meant for this person not only seeing you, but seeing themselves with frightening clarity. They saw everything that still needed work. They saw their own vulnerability exposed and felt that the defenses they had built over years were melting in your warmth. For the ego that seeks control and security, this is a death threat. Therefore, the flight was not an act of rejecting your being, but a defense mechanism against the saturation of light. A point of intensity was reached, at which the only way to regain inner balance and the false sense of control was to create physical distance. It is what we might call an energetic indigestion. More love and more truth were received than this person's emotional vessel could contain at that moment. In withdrawing, they are not necessarily seeking to end the love, but to return to a comfort zone where life is predictable and manageable, and where they do not feel the implicit demand to evolve in giant leaps. Because a connection of this nature always pushes toward evolution, and not everyone is ready to let their old self die in order to be reborn, at least not without first engaging in a struggle of resistance. This phenomenon explains the paradox of why this person can often maintain superficial relationships with others without difficulty, but flees from the deep connection with you. With others, there is no mirror. With others, they can keep their mask intact and continue to function on autopilot, but with you, the mask falls and the truth emerges. Fleeing from you is ultimately a failed attempt to flee from their own consciousness. It is an attempt to silence that inner voice that awakened with your arrival. The temporary tragedy of this situation is that this person believes that by removing your physical presence, they will also remove the discomfort of growth, but they will soon discover that once consciousness has expanded, it cannot return to its original size. It is crucial to reframe the interpretation of the pain you feel. It is not that you were not enough, it is that you were too much. You were too real for someone who lives in the fiction of their fears. You were too brave for someone who has not yet learned to hold the gaze of their own soul. Understanding this does not eliminate the sadness of absence, but it does eliminate guilt and the feeling of unworthiness. There is nothing defective about your energy. You simply vibrated at a frequency that forced the other party to confront their own limits. And in the face of that confrontation, the primary instinct was avoidance. Sacred fear paralyzes because it confronts us with the possibility of true happiness. And for many people, true happiness is frightening because it implies the loss of control and total surrender. This person felt that by being in this connection, they were losing the boundaries of their identity. They felt that they were merging into something greater, and the ego fought to reclaim its territory. The decision to leave was a Pyrrhic victory of fear over love, a battle won by momentary insecurity, but true love is enduring and is not so easily defeated by the barriers of fear. Although this person's physical body has withdrawn, the energetic imprint you left in their system is indelible. You acted as a catalyst, a substance that accelerates a chemical reaction that is now irreversible. When one views the situation from this perspective, one can feel compassion instead of resentment. One can no longer see this person as an executioner who enjoys causing pain, but as a human being overwhelmed by the magnitude of a sacred encounter, someone who is in the midst of a spiritual storm and has sought refuge in the cave of isolation. The projection this person made onto you, perhaps seeing you as unattainable or too demanding, is nothing more than a reflection of their own inner demand and their feeling of being unequal to the gift that life placed at their feet. Here, however, an unexpected twist in the plot emerges. The universe has precise laws, and energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. By trying to sever the connection on the physical level through distance and silence, this person has unintentionally caused the connection to seek other ways to manifest itself. When the door of verbal communication is closed and the paths of everyday interaction are blocked, the energy of the connection, which is still alive and pulsating, is forced to sublimate and find alternative routes. And here the story stops being only psychological and enters the territory of the mystical. If the physical body flees out of fear, the soul begins to scream to compensate for the silence. It is in this precise moment, after the break of visible communication, that the strangest, most disturbing, and most powerful phenomenon of this separation begins, something that defies logic and that you have probably already begun to experience yourself. When the ideal image collapses and the physical flight occurs, a confusing phenomenon arises that defies any materialistic logic. Verbal communication breaks off, text messages stop, and silence settles into everyday reality. But paradoxically, a much more disturbing, invasive, and deeper communication becomes activated. It is important to understand that physical distance is only an optical illusion that affects the bodies but has no authority over energy. Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a kind of invisible network that connects all humanity beneath the surface of consciousness, similar to how the roots of trees intertwine underground, even though their trunks seem separate on the surface. In connections of this magnitude, this underground network is not a simple thread. It is a high-voltage cable through which information constantly flows, and when the ego falls silent in the visible world, the soul begins to scream in the invisible one. Here we enter the territory of what we might call somatic telepathy. It is very likely that after the separation or distancing, you began to experience physical and emotional symptoms that do not belong to you. It is not suggestion, it is resonance. When this person suppresses the memory of you during the day in order to function and maintain their mask, that suppressed energy does not disappear. It shifts. Psychic energy behaves like water. When its path is blocked through one route, it seeks another outlet with greater pressure. By blocking you from their conscious mind, this person, without knowing it, sends all that emotional charge directly into your energy system through the invisible connection that unites you. You become the receiver of everything this person does not dare to consciously feel. This explains why suddenly a deep and devastating sadness overwhelms you in a moment of calm, an anxiety that comes without warning and has no relation to what you are doing at that moment. It is not your sadness, it is this person's. You feel the grief that the other party denies. You process the emotions that the other blocks. It is an involuntary emotional transfusion. The invisible cord works like a communicating vessel. When one of the two containers tries to empty itself artificially, the other fills to restore the balance of the system. Therefore, the more this person tries to forget you or distract themselves, the more intensely you feel their energetic presence invading your space. The symptoms of this somatic telepathy are very specific, and you will surely recognize several of them. One of the most common is the interruption of sleep, especially between 3 and 4 in the morning. In many spiritual and mystical traditions, it is known that during these hours, the veil between the conscious and unconscious is thinner. If you suddenly wake up without sleep and with a sense of alertness or anxiety in your chest, it is very likely that this is exactly the moment when this person's psychic defenses drop because they are asleep. When they fall asleep, their ego rests, resistance disappears, and their soul runs to seek yours. This sudden awakening is the impact of their energy reaching you when there are no rational barriers to prevent it. It is not ordinary insomnia. It is an energetic visit. Another common symptom is the feeling of pressure in the chest, as if air is lacking, or as if a physical weight is lying on the heart. Sometimes it manifests as accelerated palpitations without any physical effort. This energy center, the heart, is the anchor point of the connection. When this person thinks of you intensely or feels a piercing remorse they do not express, your heart center reacts. It is as if someone is pulling the invisible cord from the other end. It is also possible that you have perceived familiar smells. This person's perfume or a characteristic scent that evokes them in places where it is physically impossible for them to be. The sense of smell is directly connected to the limbic system, the emotional brain, and these olfactory hallucinations are actually the way your intuition translates the closeness of their vibration. This connection also manifests itself overwhelmingly in the dream world. Dreams stop being simple processes of daily information and become real encounters on the astral plane. It is possible that you have had dreams that feel more vivid than reality itself, dreams in which communication flows, in which there is no resentment, in which this person speaks to you with an honesty they do not have in the waking state. In these dreams, they tell you what they hide when awake. They embrace you or look at you with the love they try to conceal. Jung suggested that dreams are the door to the truth of the soul. If you constantly dream of this person, it is not only because you miss them, it is because there is an agreed encounter on that level. There, free from masks and fear, the souls continue the relationship that the egos have paused on earth. Waking up from such dreams usually leaves a bittersweet feeling, a mixture of peace from the reunion and pain from returning to the physical reality of silence. You may even feel sudden changes in temperature, chills running down your spine, or sudden heat in your hands or face. These are manifestations of energy moving through the cord. Sometimes you are thinking of something else, and out of nowhere, their name pierces your mind with the force of a scream, or you hear a song meaningful to both of you at the most unlikely moment. All of this is confirmation that abandonment is only a fiction of the material level. On the level of energy, you have never been so connected as now. The paradox is cruel but real. Physical distance has intensified spiritual closeness. Since the connection's energy cannot be consumed in daily contact, in trivial words or routine, all this force accumulates and travels through the invisible channel, creating this almost supernatural phenomenology. It is essential to learn to distinguish what is yours and what comes from the other in order not to go mad in this process. When you feel an overwhelming emotion that does not fit your immediate context, pause and ask inwardly, is this mine or is this a visit? Most of the time you will discover that it is a foreign burden you carry out of unconscious loyalty to the connection. Understanding this gives you your power back. You stop being a victim of your mood swings and become an observer of the connection. You know that this person has not forgotten you, that their silence is a pious lie they tell themselves, because if they had truly forgotten you, you would not feel this energetic turmoil in your body. True indifference feels like emptiness, like peace, like nothing. What you feel is turbulence, and turbulence is a sign of life, of conflict, and of latent presence. These signals are intense, sometimes exhausting, but they are the undeniable proof that the soul contract is still valid. The universe does not waste energy keeping channels active that no longer have a purpose. If the channel is open and transmitting with such force, it is because the story is not over. It has only changed stages. It has moved from the visible stage, where the actors have withdrawn, to the invisible one, where the play continues with greater dramatic intensity. But these signals can be confusing and create fear if they are not validated. Before we delve deeper into the destiny of this connection and the higher purpose of this pain, it is important to pause and observe the raw reality of what is being felt, to confirm that you are not on a lonely journey of imagination, but in a shared experience of resonance. It is natural that upon hearing all this, a reasonable doubt arises in the mind. It is easy to think that maybe everything is a product of desire, that the mind invents signals to comfort itself in the face of absence. Therefore, it is the moment to pause and look around, to use this space not only as a place of listening, but as a collective mirror. When you begin to recognize that this phenomenon does not exist only within you, but is reflected in countless other hearts, the pain loses its isolating character. You understand that you are part of a larger process, a movement of the soul that people all over the world go through when a connection of this depth enters a phase of transformation. This knowledge does not bring immediate relief, but it brings clarity, and clarity is the first form of peace. Because once the truth is spoken or recognized, the energy begins to reorganize. What today appears to be a labyrinth of doubts will tomorrow become a drawn path. And although you cannot yet see the exit, every breath, every thought, and every conscious decision brings you closer to a point where everything makes sense. Until then, only one thing remains for you: to trust the process that is greater than both of you and that leads you, visibly or invisibly, step by step, to where you are meant to be.